Alright, so since I'm having a hard time uploading my Thomas and Friends the Great Discovery video on my iPad since I recorded 45 minutes yesterday, it's giving me a long time because every time I tried uploading it, it failed because of Neil Mohan. So anyways, let's focus on this on my computer. Anyways, here we go. Text of speech.
Plot. The railway is preparing for Sodor Day and Thomas and James are in a high-speed race to the wharf, where the winner will be given a special job by the thin controller. Thomas wins and is sent into the hills to collect lumber with Duncan. After Duncan teases Thomas by stating that the thin controller wants him to work with Thomas because Duncan knows the tracks in the hills, Thomas teases back by calling Duncan small. This leads Duncan to pay Thomas out by sending him on an old, disused branch line which he claims will lead Thomas back to the wharf faster. I am brave and I am strong. I'll get to the wharf and it won't take long. Thomas reaches a junction on the branch line. Going straight, he comes across an old bridge. Determined but frightened to make it to the other side, Thomas slowly makes his way across the bridge, until a section in front of him dislodges and, seconds later, collapses. Thomas reverses back to safety just before the rest of the bridge gives way. He reverses back to the junction and takes the other route. As he journeys further down the line, he comes across an old overgrown town. Excited to spread the word, Thomas meets Madge, who he tells the news about the discovery to, and she drives off and meets Mighty Mac, who tells Sir Handel, then Scarloey, then Renius, who he tells the thin controller about the news, and he gets Harold to find the fat controller. After hearing all the news, the fat controller tells Thomas that the town is Great Waterden, the largest town on Sodor when steam engines first came to the island that had since been thought to be lost. The fat controller decides that the restoration of the legendary lost town would be perfect for Sodor Day and calls the pack to help. Thomas is told to take charge of the engines working around the town, while a new tank engine named Stanley is brought to do Thomas's regular jobs. All of the engines take a liking to Stanley, who does a good job and has fun as well. Unfortunately, Thomas becomes jealous of Stanley after seeing him doing his jobs and fraternizing with his friends. At Tidmouth Sheds, the engines are making different sounds on their whistles, which they find funny. When Thomas arrives at the sheds, he is surprised to see Stanley in his berth, and he greets Thomas with a chuckle along with the other engines. This makes Thomas very angry, as he is not just in the mood to chuckle, he did not like Stanley doing his work and being everyone's best friend, and laughing in his berth makes him feel very bad. Unable to tolerate the sight any longer, he angrily leaves everyone at the sheds and puffs back to Great Waterden, realizing he has an important job to do there. The next day, Thomas, while working hard and proving to everyone that he is better than Stanley, rolls off the tracks, and Stanley is called to take his place as the leader of the restoration project, making Thomas more angry. When Thomas comes back from the works, the fat controller decided to let Stanley stay in charge as he has done a good job, much to Thomas's shock and dismay. Later, Thomas is shunting stone trucks for Stanley to take away when he decides to make Stanley look silly by giving him a train too heavy for him to pull. Unfortunately, the plan backfires, as Stanley ascends the hill, a coupling breaks and the trucks race down the hill, veering into a siding and crashing into the half-finished tower, causing it to collapse, much to everyone's horror. When the fat controller demands an explanation behind the excess load, Thomas, too ashamed to admit the truth, stays silent, causing the other engines to also question Thomas's motives. After that, the fat controller states that the tower's destruction will likely set back the restoration past Sodor Day, causing some of the other engines, except Toby, Percy, Emily, and Stanley, to be cross with Thomas, and they chuff away without speaking to him, leaving Thomas feeling depressed. Later that night, Thomas decides to clear the rubble out of the way. He is almost finished when he accidentally bumps a truck into an old mine shaft, and races in after it. At some point, Thomas and the truck go different ways at a junction, though Thomas is unaware of this. Continuing through the mine shaft, he crashes through a boarded-up tunnel and falls down into a body of water where he floats down an underground waterway. This is a state of emergency. Everyone must look for Thomas. After the engines meet at Great Waterden, Stanley asks where Thomas is, and the engines soon realize that Thomas is missing. The fat controller organizes an island-wide search party, and despite everyone's best efforts, no one can find Thomas. While searching, Stanley realizes about how upset Thomas has been about him ever since he came to Sodor and all that he had been doing, and so decides to help put things right. Everyone Everyone is just about to give up, when Percy reminds them that Thomas found Great Waterton on his own, that it is his town and that they cannot have the opening without him, and everyone agrees. Stanley thinks Thomas ran away after the accident yesterday and tries to find him in the hills. Meanwhile, Thomas continues floating in the dark tunnel until he reaches an opening exit to the mine and is flung across a canyon and down a hill without the wooden planks that made him float into the mine, settling near some tracks. Stanley decides to make another search effort by himself before he returns to work. Thomas, with the last of his steam, sounds a loud, long whistle. Stanley hears it and hurries to where Thomas is stranded beside the track. The two tank engines make up and Stanley pulls Thomas back onto the rails, but the strain is too much for Stanley and a valve inside his boiler bursts. Thomas, using some of Stanley's coal, pushes him back to Great Waterton. The word soon spreads that Thomas has been found. But we're all leaders of the track. The standpipe tower is rebuilt, completing the restoration in time for Sodor Day. As a sign of friendship, Thomas offers Stanley his last job, bringing the mayor to the festivities at Great Waterton. The engines gather at the town for the celebration and Thomas realizes just how important his friends are. Characters: Thomas, Edward, Henry, Gordon, James, Percy, Toby, Emily, Harvey, Duncan, Madge, Jack, Alfie, Oliver the Excavator, Ned, Buster, Harold, Frankie, Sir Topham Hatt, Lady Hatt, Jenny Packard, Mr. Percival, Bill and Ben inaudible, Scarloey inaudible, Renius inaudible, Sir Handel inaudible, Mighty Mac inaudible, Terence inaudible, Bertie inaudible, Arthur does not speak in Japanese dub, Molly does not speak, Salty does not speak, Peter Sam does not speak, Freddie does not speak, Rusty does not speak, Annie and Clarabelle do not speak, Rocky does not speak, Trevor does not speak, Max and Monty do not speak, Jeremy does not speak, Sodor Brass Band do not speak. The third mayor of Sodor does not speak, Rosie cameo with cameo Diesel. Cameo Mavis cameo Ari and Bert cameos Diesel 10 cameo Dennis cameo George cameo Butch cameo Stephen Hat cameo Bridget Hat cameo Farmer Finney cameo Refreshment Lady cameo Cyril cameo Lord Callan cameo David Midden cameo Cookie the Clown cameo. The photographer cameo Sir Topham Hatt's blonde-haired assistant cameo. The storyteller cameo. The circus clowns cameos. The Sodor dairy manager cameo. The dairy employees cameos. The sports day children cameos. The Sodor school team fans cameos. The Tidman Sheds carpenters cameos. 2 railway board members cameos. Mr. Percival's assistant cameo. Elizabeth flashback cameo. Big Mickey faceless cameo. Henrietta music video cameos. Troublesome trucks.
That's similar to Mickey Mouse, my favorite.
Music video cameo. Kelly music video cameo. Alicia Bodie mentioned in newspaper characters introduced. Stanley J. K. Lee mentioned in newspaper.
Now we can read the transcript of the great discovery of Thomas and friends. So here we go, you guys. Because since I failed to upload it on my iPad because there was storage full because of Neo Mohan, I'm doing it on my computer instead. But if it fails, then that's okay. I always tried my best, you know. Because one of my teachers at school said that I'm doing a great job while some of them are working with a teacher. And I'm doing it in my mind so that I can remember properly. Maybe too much, but we'll see, okay? Wow, that was close. So the text-to-speech will be reading it for me. Since I did a good job reading it, so here.
The Great Discovery Transcript. Sign in to edit. The Great Discovery Transcript. Episode. The Great Discovery. Previous. Wash behind your buffers. Next. Hero of the Rails Special Tramp Trouble episode. Narrator. Sodor Day was coming to the island of Sodor. Thomas and James were very excited. There would be picnics all over the island, a magnificent brass band, and the biggest fair Sodor had ever seen. All the engines were busy, and everyone was excited. Sodor Day was the island's grandest celebration.
Sorry,
Thomas
don't
and
mind.
James were racing to Crovan's Gate Wharf. Whoever arrived first would be given a special. Thomas, I'm gonna win, cried Thomas. James, no, I will. whistled James. Narrator, and on they raced, faster than the wind, and more daring than darting arrows. Thomas and James steamed into Crovan's Gate Wharf. First, James in front. Then, Thomas took the lead. The wharf was buzzing, barges chugged, cranes swung, and trucks rattled and rolled. Thomas and James raced by. The narrow gauge engines whistled and wheezed in surprise at the speed and steam of the standard gauge engines. The thin controller was waiting. Thomas whooshed around the corner, puffing and huffing, just in front of James. Thomas, I won, exclaimed Thomas. Hooray, bad luck, James. Narrator, James's cheeks went as red as his paintwork. James, I'll win on my way back to Tidmouth. The thin controller, well done, both of you. The thin controller announced loudly. James, you are to unload barges here at the wharf. Narrator, James smiled. He liked that job. Now, he didn't mind losing the race. The thin controller, and the special goes to the winner, Thomas. Narrator, Thomas was excited. The thin controller, you are to meet with Duncan at Crovan's Gate. You will bring lumber from the hills down to the wharf. It's a very important job. Narrator, Thomas wheezed a whiff of steam. He was disappointed. He wanted to work at the wharf, and Duncan was tricky, and liked to tease the big engines, especially Thomas. The thin controller, Duncan, added the thin controller, please look after Thomas. Duncan, Mr. Percival says that because you standard gauge engines don't know the tracks in the hills. Duncan teased. Thomas, yes, we do. The thin controller wants me to work with you, because you little engines can only carry small loads. Teased Thomas back. Narrator, Duncan huffed crossly away. Later, at Crovan's Gate, Thomas was waiting for Duncan. Duncan puffed in. Thomas, is that all the lumber you can pull? Teased Thomas. James is waiting for me at the wharf. I can't wait for you all day. Narrator, that made Duncan cross. Thomas pumped his pistons. His trucks were now piled with logs, and he was ready to leave. Then, Duncan had a cheeky idea. Duncan, I can show you a quick way back to the wharf, but you'll have to use the rolling river bridge along the old branch line. It's very rickety. Narrator, Thomas wasn't sure. Duncan, you big engines aren't scared of high bridges, are you? Teased Duncan. Thomas, no, we're not. Puffed Thomas crossly. I like high bridges. Please, show me the way to the old branch line. Narrator, so the two engines steamed off. Thomas and Duncan came to a stop after the sheds. Duncan, take the main line to the bridge. Explained Duncan. It's downhill from the other side straight to the wharf. Narrator, Thomas's signal turned green. Thomas, thank you, Duncan. Said Thomas, and he puffed off. Narrator, but Duncan didn't know the high bridge wasn't safe. It hadn't been used for a very long time. Thomas chugged slowly toward the bridge. The bridge looked very old, and it was very high, and the ravine was very deep. Thomas could hear rocks falling into the ravine. He felt a little scared. Thomas, I like high bridges, but this one is really high. If I chuck slowly, I'll reach the other side before I know it. He puffed to himself. Narrator, wheel turn by wheel turn, Thomas edged onto the bridge. Thomas, I am brave, and I am strong, I'll chuck to the wharf, it won't be long. Narrator, Thomas was now halfway across the bridge. The sound of the fallen rocks was louder and louder. The bridge had started to shudder and shake. Thomas didn't like it at all, but he wanted to get to the other side. Then Thomas heard a mighty crack. Part of the bridge in front of him came away from the rocks. Thomas, cinders and ashes. Thomas cried, I must get back to safety. Narrator, he was very scared. Then, Thomas started to reverse. He puffed slowly and carefully. Then there was another mighty crack. A large piece of the bridge broke and fell into the ravine below.
However you book your
With
flight.
his biggest and bravest puff, Thomas went backwards onto the hillside. Thomas, I'm safe, he cried, just as the last part of the bridge roared and swung over the deep ravine. Narrator, Thomas peered down to the broken bridge below. Thomas, flatten my funnel, he gasped. Narrator, Thomas reversed back to the junction. He saw that there was another track. Thomas, maybe this line goes to the wharf, too, thought Thomas, and made his way down the steep track. Narrator, the track was covered in thick
Oh
bushes.
dear.
They scrunched and scratched as Thomas chucked through them. Thomas, no one has been down here for a very long time. He huffed, and he puffed on. Narrator, then, Thomas gasped. He had arrived at a hidden town. It was overgrown, rusty, and very old. Thomas, bubbling boilers. Thomas cried. Narrator, there There were lots of old buildings and a
Oh
station
my.
covered in
Oh
ivy.
dear.
Thomas, what a funny place to have a town, he thought. Narrator, Thomas was very excited. Thomas, I wonder what else I'll find. Narrator, Thomas came to a halt. Thomas, fizzling fireboxes, he gasped. Narrator, he had never seen such an amazing sight. Thomas, there are so many buildings. It must have been a very large town. He cried, and that looks like part of a tower. Narrator, Thomas was very excited. Thomas, I must tell everyone about this. He whistled loudly. Narrator, Thomas bumped and bashed his way along the old track. He had to spread the news. He blew his whistle as hard as could. Thomas, someone must hear me, he thought. Narrator, so, he whistled again. Suddenly, a horn beeped. Thomas, that's Elizabeth, he smiled. Narrator, Elizabeth was surprised to see Thomas. Thomas,
Elizabeth, not
I've
Elizabeth.
discovered an old town. It is hidden in the forest. Thomas called excitedly. Elizabeth, fenders and flatbeds, exclaimed Elizabeth. Everyone must know about this. Narrator, Elizabeth found Mighty Mac at Bend Glass Crossing. Elizabeth, Thomas has discovered a hidden town. She tooted loudly. Tell everyone. Narrator, Mighty Mac told Sir Handel, who told Scarloey, who told Renias, who told Duke, who told the Thin Controller, who told Harold, who immediately eventually flew off to Topham Hall. The Fat Controller had been having tea when Harold arrived. Harold, Thomas has discovered a hidden town, shouted Harold. Narrator, the Fat Controller was very excited. The Fat Controller, take me to Thomas at once, he boomed. Narrator, soon, Thomas and the Fat Controller arrived at the hidden town. Thomas, here it is, sir, Thomas exclaimed. Narrator, the Fat Controller beamed from ear to ear. The Fat Controller, Thomas, you have made a great discovery. This is the town of Great Waterden. Narrator, Thomas gasped. He and the other engines had heard stories about Great Waterden. The Fat Controller, when steam engines first came to Sodor, the Fat Controller began, this was the main town. It was called Great Waterden. The waterworks here provided water for everyone. Thomas, why does no one live here now? Thomas asked. The Fat Controller, all the people left to live in new towns, and everyone thought the town of Great Waterden was lost forever. Thomas, but now it is found, cheered Thomas. The Fat Controller, thanks to you, Thomas. Smiled the Fat Controller. I will telephone the mayor straight away, and I am very proud of you. Narrator, Thomas felt really important. Thomas, thank you, sir, he said. Hooray. Narrator, the Fat Controller arrived at Tidmouth Sheds. He had important news for everyone. The other engines were very proud of Thomas. The Fat Controller, the town of Great Waterden is to be restored in time for Sodor Day. He boomed, the restoration will be a lot of work. Narrator, Percy was puzzled. Percy, what's restoration? He whispered quietly. Gordon, restoration, groaned Gordon loudly. That is when you make something old look new again. The Fat Controller, there are many jobs to be done. The Fat Controller added. Narrator, all the engines were pleased. The Fat Controller gave each of the engines important jobs. They whistled and tooted in excitement. The Fat Controller, now I will telephone Miss Jenny. We need the help of Packard and Company. Narrator, and so he did. The Fat Controller, Miss Jenny, Thomas has discovered the old town of Great Waterden. We need the help of your machines to rebuild it. It must be ready in time for Sodor Day. Miss Jenny, how exciting, said Miss Jenny. They will be delighted to help. I'll tell them right away, sir. Narrator, so, Miss Jenny went to see her machines. Jack, we will work harder than ever, said Jack excitedly. Narrator, at Province Gate Sheds, the Thin Controller gathered his engines. He spoke loudly. The Thin Controller, you will all be very busy. I know you will all do your very best. Narrator, the engines whistled and hooted happily. There were plenty of jobs for everyone, both standard gauge and narrow gauge worked hard pulling and pushing, puffing and chuffing with all their might. Workmen cleared trees in the woods. Emily and Gordon pulled fallen trees and rocks, James and Edward brought stone to the docks and harbors. Toby dropped off workmen to work with the pack, while Percy dropped supplies. Everyone was determined to make the town that time forgot shine like new on Sodor Day. Back at Farquhar Sheds, the Fat Controller was talking to Thomas. The Fat Controller, Thomas, you are to find all the lost and hidden lines around the town. Narrator, Thomas was pleased. the Fat Controller, and because you discovered Great Waterden, the Fat Controller added, I'm also giving you the most important job of all. You are to be in charge of all the work. Thomas, cinders and ashes, cried Thomas proudly. The Fat Controller, I'm bringing an engine from the mainland to work on your branch line. The Fat Controller added. Narrator, Thomas didn't take any notice of this. He was too busy thinking about being in charge of all the work at Great Waterden. The next morning, the Fat Controller had arrived at Vickerstown to meet the new engine. James and Emily were very excited. Suddenly, there was a loud sound of pistons pumping. From behind the cloud of steam, a new tank engine puffed slowly into the terminus. He was shinier, and bigger, and stronger than Thomas. The Fat Controller, this is Stanley. Boomed the Fat Controller. Welcome to Sodor, Stanley. Emily, oh, my, gasped Emily. Whatever will Thomas say? Narrator, Thomas didn't know that Stanley had arrived. He had been busy. He had already found a lot of hidden tracks. Thomas puffed proudly along to his new engine sheds. James huffed up. Thomas, look at my new shed. Thomas said grandly, while I'm in charge, I won't have to puff back to Tidmouth or Farquhar sheds. Narrator, but James wasn't interested in Thomas's shed. James, I just met the new engine. James snorted. He's called Stanley. He's very friendly. Everyone likes him. He's doing your jobs very well. Narrator, Thomas was surprised. Suddenly, his new shed didn't feel so important. The next day, Thomas had to pull heavy trucks of stone to Knapford Harbor. He stopped at the washdown and saw a shiny new tank engine. Thomas, that must be Stanley. He puffed to himself. Narrator, Stanley and Percy were playing and joking. Both engines had told the cleaners to pour on more bubbles. Percy was giggling and Stanley was laughing ever louder. Thomas felt left out. He whistled to his friend, but Percy was too busy having that he didn't notice Thomas. Thomas puffed on, feeling upset. Later, Thomas stopped at Ill's Bridge, where Gordon was waiting. Suddenly, with a whoosh and whistle, Stanley stopped in the platform with Annie and Clarabelle. They were having a wonderful time. They whistled, hello, to Thomas. Gordon, Stanley knows how to have fun, Gordon declared. Narrator, Thomas watched Stanley collect passengers with his coaches. He didn't think it was fun at all. That night, Thomas puffed into Tidmouth sheds. He was very tired. Tonight, he wanted to be with his friends. Thomas, cinders and ashes, he gasped. Narrator, Stanley was in his berth. Stanley blew a high sound from his whistle, then Gordon blew a low sound. And Emily trundled a sound no one had ever heard before. All the engines whooshed and wheeshed with laughter. Stanley, hello, you must be Thomas, whistled Stanley. All the engines, hello, Thomas, chuckled the other engines. Narrator, but Thomas wasn't chuckling. He didn't like Stanley doing his jobs, or pulling his coaches, or being everyone's best friend. But laughing in his berth at Tidmouth sheds was worst of all. Thomas, I have to get back to Great Waterden, he cried. I have work to do, and he raced quickly away. Narrator, Thomas wished Stanley had never come to Sodor. The next day, Thomas was extra busy. He wanted everyone to see he was better than Stanley. Thomas collected
That's
Jack.
arrogant. Thomas is arrogant. That means
than
you
ever
don't
worked.
care about anybody
So
except
Jack,
yourself.
Jack, don't worry, Thomas. Isabella, Buster, Ned, Ellie, and Oliver are the best. Patrick and Topper are making concrete like never before, and Max and Monty are dumping so much loads, they're getting dizzy. Narrator, Thomas smiled. He liked being in charge. He wanted to show everyone he could do everything. Next, he was pulling some heavy trucks. Then there was trouble. Thomas was puffing too fast round the bend. He toppled off the track. His load crashed down the bank. Thomas, oh, no, cried Thomas. Narrator, luckily, no one was hurt. The Fat Controller arrived with Edward and Rocky. He was cross. The Fat Controller, Thomas, you must go to the steamworks. Narrator, Thomas didn't want to go to the steamworks. He wanted to stay in charge. The Fat Controller, Stanley will take your place in charge of the work at Great Waterden. Added the Fat Controller. Narrator, this was the worst news ever for Thomas. He was so upset. Rocky lowered Thomas onto Edward's flatbed. Slowly, Edward puffed away from Great Waterden. Edward had to stop at a signal. Stanley chugged cheerfully towards them. Stanley, bad luck, Thomas, he whistled, and he puffed away. Narrator, in the distance, they could hear the other engines cheer, welcome, Stanley. Thomas was cross. Thomas, I found Great Waterden, he thought. I'll be back, I'll be in charge again. Then everyone will see I'm more useful than Stanley. Edward, don't feel bad, Thomas, huffed Edward, trying to cheer Thomas up, we'll soon go back to work. And you and Stanley can work together to make sure Great Waterden looks as good as new. Narrator, Thomas wanted to think Edward was right, but he couldn't escape the bad feeling in his boiler. The signal changed to green, and he puffed on. Edward was right. Soon enough, Thomas was as good as new. Thomas, now I can get back to my job at Great Waterden. He cried. Narrator, Thomas couldn't wait. He chuffed cheerily out of the repair yard. Thomas was very happy to see his friend Percy. Thomas, hello, Percy, he said. I thought Toby was to pick up the workmen. Percy, hello, Thomas. Stanley's given me extra jobs because he thinks I give very smooth rides. Peeped Percy proudly. Tomorrow, Stanley and I are going to work together on the tower. Narrator, Thomas didn't want to hear about Stanley. He was upset. Next, Thomas found Kelly, Max and Monty. They were very busy. Kelly, come on, Max and Monty. Let's make Stanley very proud, cried Kelly. He's asked us to fill in 3 holes, and we've only filled in 1. Thomas, hello, tooted Thomas. Narrator, but Kelly, Max, and Monty were too busy to notice him. Thomas was even more upset. He felt as if he didn't matter at all. He puffed sadly away, but Thomas forgot about feeling sad when he chuffed into Great Waterden Station. It was starting to look as it must have been done long ago. Thomas, bubbling boilers, he cried. This is exciting. Narrator, then, Thomas saw Stanley. He was with the Fat Controller. The Fat Controller saw Thomas. The Fat Controller, come here, he boomed. Stanley, hello, Thomas, whistled Stanley. Narrator, Thomas whistled back, but very quietly. The Fat Controller, Stanley has done a great job. Work is moving fast, the Fat Controller declared. So I have decided, he added, that Stanley will stay in charge and you will help him. Narrator, Thomas's heart sunk. Stanley was to stay in charge. Thomas had lost the most important job of all. The job he wanted more than anything else. That afternoon, Stanley asked Thomas to shunt some trucks. Stanley, you're the best shunter ever, Thomas. Stanley chuffed cheerily. I'll be back for the trucks very soon. Narrator, Thomas was really good at shunting trucks, and he also really liked shunting. But he didn't really like Stanley telling him what to do. Thomas moved unhappily to the trucks. He wanted things back the way they were, before Stanley had arrived on the railway. Thomas shunted lots of trucks. Stanley had to take them up the steep hill out of the town to the wharf. Suddenly, an idea flew into Thomas's funnel. Thomas, if I shunt an extra long line of trucks, Stanley will not even be able to pull them. He puffed to himself. Then everyone will see he's not so strong after all, and I will be in charge again. Narrator, soon, the trucks were ready. They were very, very heavy. Stanley returned shortly. Stanley, my, that's a very long train, he cried. Thomas, not for a strong engine like you, said Thomas. Narrator, but Thomas knew it was too long and too heavy. Stanley started up the hill. It was very steep. Stanley was doing his best. Stanley was using up all his huff and all his puff. The trucks clanked and creaked. The train was far too heavy. Stanley's wheels spun and slid. Suddenly, the coupling snapped, and Stanley's trucks rolled away, faster and faster. Troublesome trucks. On, yelled the trucks. Narrator, the engines gasped as Stanley's train came running down the hill. It smashed into the tower. As the tower crashed to the ground, bricks and dust exploded everywhere. All the hard work was wasted. The engines gasped in horror, and Thomas felt worst of all. He knew it was all his fault. The Fat Controller and Miss Jenny came to see what had happened. The Fat Controller, this is a disaster, boomed the Fat Controller. Thomas, why did you shunt so many trucks for Stanley? Narrator, Thomas felt terrible. He knew why he had done it, but he couldn't tell the Fat Controller and the other engines. He felt too ashamed. So, he said nothing. The Fat Controller was very cross. The other engines started to whisper. James, Thomas doesn't like Stanley, snorted James. That's why he shunted too many trucks for him. Toby, why would Thomas do such a thing? Asked Toby. Percy, Thomas would never do that, thought Percy, but he was worried. Narrator, Thomas felt very bad. He puffed slowly away. Thomas found an old siding, where he could be alone. Thomas, the other engines don't want me around, he puffed sadly. They wish I wasn't here at all. Narrator, Stanley stopped near Thomas. He saw that Thomas looked sad and alone. Stanley, Thomas feels bad, he thought. Narrator, he felt very sorry for him. Later, the Fat Controller called the engines together. The Fat Controller, now, Great Waterden may not be ready for Sodor Day, he announced sternly. Narrator, the engines gasped. The Fat Controller, Miss Jenny's crew will load the rubble into the trucks tonight, but this means extra work for all of you. He added, tomorrow, you will start to shunt the trucks away to the sidings. Narrator, Thomas had let down the Fat Controller, he had let down the other engines, and he had let himself down. The other engines started to chuff away. No one spoke to Thomas. He was no longer in charge, and he felt he was no longer wanted. That night, all the other engines were asleep in their sheds, but not Thomas. Jack and Alfie had already loaded the trucks of rubble. Thomas, if I shunt all the trucks away to the sidings, the tracks will be clear in the morning. Then, everyone will like me again. Narrator, Thomas wanted to do something to get his old job back. So Thomas started to shunt the trucks away. Thomas worked very hard. He felt very pleased with himself. Then Thomas saw one last truck. It had rolled in front of an old mine shaft. Thomas, I'll soon fix that. Thomas smiled. Narrator, then there was trouble. Thomas biffed the truck too hard. It rolled forward and disappeared into the mine. Thomas, cinders and ashes, exclaimed Thomas. Where did that truck go? Narrator, Thomas rolled forward and peered inside. It was very dark. Thomas, I must finish the job, he cried. I'll soon find the truck, and Thomas went into the mine. Narrator, he was happy to have a bright light. He saw the truck rolling away, then it disappeared around the bend. Thomas, bust my buffers. Puffed Thomas, I better go after it. Narrator, the slope was very steep. Thomas wheeshed down and it clattered around the bend. Up Thomas whooshed, and down he wheeshed. Thomas, whee. Thomas whistled and, wahoo, he cried. Narrator, it was very scary, but it was very exciting. Thomas had almost caught up to the truck. Thomas, you won't get away from me, he whistled happily. Narrator, but Thomas didn't see the junction ahead. The truck clattered down the right track, and Thomas sped down the left. Thomas had lost the runaway truck, but his roller coaster was so much fun, Thomas soon forgot about the truck. Then there was trouble. The tunnel ahead was blocked. Thomas, oh, no, cried Thomas. Narrator, he applied his brakes, but was too late. Thomas crashed straight through the blocked tunnel, and with a mighty splash, Thomas landed in a pool of water. Thomas, fizzling fireboxes. This tunnel is flooded, he gasped. Narrator, it didn't feel fun anymore. It felt scary. Thomas, I wish I was back at Great Waterden, he whispered quietly. Narrator, Thomas drifted slowly forward. There was nothing he could do. Thomas, cinder and ashes. Thomas gasped as he floated along the tunnel. Narrator, he blew his whistle as loud as he could. Thomas, help, he cried. Narrator, but there was no one there to hear him. Thomas, no one will find me now. Thomas wailed, no one will want to find me. Narrator, the next morning, Stanley, James, Gordon, Percy, Edward, Henry, Emily, and Toby had arrived for work. Stanley, where's Thomas? Stanley asked. Narrator, the engines looked. Thomas wasn't there. They all thought hard. No one knew where Thomas was. James was worried, so he asked the Scarlowy engines at Crovan's gate sheds. James, have any of you seen Thomas? He asked. Narrator, none of the little engines had seen Thomas either. Percy called Jack and his team. Percy, we can't find Thomas, he peeped. Do you know where he is? Narrator, Jack and his team thought hard, but none of them had seen Thomas. Thomas drifted along the tunnel. He realized he was moving faster. Thomas, bust my buffers, he cried, as he raced through the tunnel. Narrator, the Fat Controller was called. Edward, sir, Thomas has disappeared. Edward sighed worriedly. Emily, no one knows where he is. Cried Emily. Percy, and I miss him, added Percy. The Fat Controller, this is very strange. Boomed the Fat Controller. Narrator, everyone agreed that they had to find Thomas at once. The Fat Controller, this is a state of emergency, he boomed importantly. Everyone must look for Thomas. Narrator, deep inside the mine, Thomas went up and down, around and about, as the water roared over him. The Fat Controller drove and drove to every lookout point. High in the hills, the narrow-gauge engines puffed and peered, but no one could find Thomas. The Fat Controller stood beside the tumbled tower. Everyone was tired. Everyone had tried their hardest, but there was no sign of Thomas. Percy, sir, we have to find Thomas, pleaded Percy. He found Great Waterden. It's his town. We can't have the opening without him. Narrator, all the engines agreed. The Fat Controller, you're quite right, Percy. Agreed the Fat Controller. We must find Thomas. Narrator, Stanley also knew how important Thomas was. He jumped thoughtfully away. Stanley arrived at the sidings, a train of trucks was waiting for him. But Stanley wasn't thinking about trucks, he was thinking about Thomas. Stanley thought back to the day when Thomas saw him pulling Annie and Clarabelle, and he remembered the evening at Tidman's sheds. Thomas was upset because Stanley was in his berth. Then, Stanley remembered Thomas's face after the accident. Stanley, Thomas isn't a bad engine. He's a sad engine. Stanley thought slowly. I wonder if he has run away because he thinks no one likes him anymore. Maybe Thomas is hiding up in the hidden hills. I'll look for him there. I must tell him we all miss him. And Stanley set off to the hills. Narrator, in the dark tunnel, Thomas was very scared. He was washed and waved forward. His fire had gone out and his boiler was cold. Stanley was high up in the hills. Stanley, where are you, Thomas? We miss you, he cried. Narrator, but only his echo came back. The river was rushing, and Thomas whooshed with it off into the darkness. Suddenly, he crashed through a thick wall of bushes. He flew across the ravine, and hit the ground with a bump. Thomas slid down a hill. Trees and rocks were everywhere. Thomas, help, Thomas cried. Narrator, at last, Thomas slithered to a stop at the bottom of the hill. He was stuck. Thomas saw he had landed next to an old line. Thomas, but how am I going to get onto it? He cried. Narrator, Thomas could do nothing but wait and hope. Stanley had looked everywhere, but he couldn't find Thomas. Soon, he would have to go back to work at Great Waterden. Thomas was thinking about Great Waterden. He thought about the tower, and the moment Stanley's trucks smashed into it, and the tower tumbling down. Thomas, now I wish I hadn't made Stanley pull all those trucks. I didn't like him doing my jobs, and now look where I am. I'm a very silly engine, he thought sadly. Narrator, Thomas wished to be back with his friends. Stanley had to get back to Great Waterden. Stanley, I'll blow my whistle one last time. Narrator, Stanley wheezed, and he whistled loud and long. Narrator, this time, Thomas heard the whistle. Thomas, it's Stanley, he gasped. Narrator, with his very last puff and his very last huff, Thomas blew his whistle as loud as he could. Stanley heard Thomas. Quickly, he reversed back to the junction. Stanley, Thomas, he exclaimed happily. Is that you? Narrator, Thomas had run out of puff. He couldn't whistle again. He could only wait. Then, Thomas saw Stanley chuffing around the bend. Thomas, Stanley, he cried. Am I glad to see you? Stanley, Thomas, cried Stanley. Where have you been? Did you run away? Thomas, no, explained Thomas sadly. I was trying to be a really useful engine. Narrator, then, he told Stanley all about his adventure in the mines. Stanley was amazed. Thomas, Stanley, continued Thomas, I'm sorry that I was horrid to you. I was wrong, and I was silly to be cross that you were in charge. I want to be your friend. Narrator, Stanley smiled. Stanley, Thomas, he wheezed, we will be friends, and I'll have you back on that track in no time. Narrator, soon, Stanley was hooked up to Thomas. Then, Stanley reversed with all his might. Thomas was very heavy. There was a lot of water in his firebox. Stanley didn't give up. Stanley, I can do it. He wheezed. Narrator, and with a mighty heave, Stanley pulled his friend back onto the track. Thomas, hooray, tooted Thomas. Narrator, then, there was a very loud crack. Stanley's pressure valve had burst. Stanley was a very strong engine, but pulling Thomas had been too much for him. Now, he couldn't move. Stanley felt very upset. Thomas, don't worry, said Thomas. You helped me and now I'll help you, by shunting you home. Narrator, Stanley smiled. Thomas was his new friend. There was nothing Thomas wouldn't do for Stanley. The fireman put Stanley's dry coal into Thomas's firebox. In no time at all, Thomas's boiler was bubbling, and his steam was wheezing. Thomas, here we go, Stanley. Thomas huffed happily. Narrator, Stanley smiled back, and wheel-turn by wheel-turn, Thomas shunted Stanley along the old line. It was very hard work. Thomas had to puff up steep and thick bushes. But he didn't mind. He was proud to push his new friend Stanley home. At last, the two tank engines arrived at Great Waterden. Thomas was tired, weary, but triumphant. Henry, Rocky, Edward, and Emily were busy working. They cheered and whistled when they saw Thomas and Stanley. And soon, the sound of the engines, whistles were echoing around Great Waterden. The news spread throughout Sodor. Narrow gauge engines, Thomas is found. The Scarlowy engines cried. Narrator, the thin controller beamed with pride. Terence told Harvey, and Harvey told Trevor. Harvey, Thomas is home. He's back forever. Narrator, Bill and Ben told Neville, and he told Molly. They cheered and they whistled, they felt so jolly. All the diesels met in the Dieselworks sidings. They couldn't believe such wonderful tidings. Percy exclaimed to Gordon, Toby, and James. Percy, the best friend is found. Percy proudly exclaimed. Narrator, Arthur told Dennis along the Norramby branch. Arthur, have you heard the news? Thomas is back. Narrator, Miss Jenny told Jack, and Jack told his team. All the machines, hooray, and hurrah, they shouted and screamed. Narrator, Harold touched down and found Bertie the bus. Bertie hooted and tooted, and made such a fuss. Bertie, Brenda and Algie all found Lady Hat, who whooped and waved. Lady Hat told her
It's like
husband.
a rhyming a positive,
Lady Hat,
if you ask me.
Sodor is safe.
Oh, pig and
Frankie,
peel
Thomas is
drops.
found.
What an amazing
Frankie
story.
franked aloud. Narrator, the cheers and the cheering were a marvelous sound. The Fat Controller proclaimed very grandly. The Fat Controller, Stanley saved Thomas, and Thomas saved Stanley. Narrator, next morning, Thomas puffed into Great Waterden. Percy and Stanley were working hard helping to rebuild the tower. It was almost finished. Thomas smiled. Now, he was happy that Stanley had come to Sodor. He had so many wonderful friends. Thomas, how could I ever have wanted to be more important than any of them? He puffed to himself. Narrator, now they all worked happily together. Later, the Fat Controller arrived. The tower was finished. It looked magnificent. The Fat Controller beamed. The Fat Controller, well done to you all. Beamed the Fat Controller. Great Waterden is now ready for Sodor Day. Thomas, please, sir. Tooted Thomas. May Stanley bring the mayor to the opening. The Fat Controller, that was your special, Thomas. Said the Fat Controller. Are you sure? Thomas, yes, sir. Thomas smiled. Sure than sure. Narrator, the big day arrived. Stanley arrived proudly with the mayor. Thomas was pleased for his new friend. The mayor, the Fat Controller, and Lady Hat stood by the new tower. The Fat Controller, Great Waterden is no longer lost. Welcome to the town of Great Waterden. Narrator, then everyone looked up. They could hear the whirl of flame. It was Tiger Moth, flying high in the sky, and over the town of Great Waterden. All the engines whistled and whooped. Jack and his team cheered, and everyone clapped. Thomas smiled. He had wanted to be the leader of the track. Thomas, but we are all leaders of the track. Puffed Thomas proudly, and he couldn't have been happier.
The end.
Categories. Community content is available under CC by SAW unless otherwise noted.
And if you're watching this, like and subscribe. So anyways, gotta go. Bye.